U.S. Republican frontrunner Donald Trump says all Muslims should be banned from the U.S., a proposal that has caused outrage. And as Britain marks 50 years since the signing of its Race Relations Act, we ask, how has racism changed over the years? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Jane Dutton. Unhinged and racist. These are some of the words colleagues and critics alike have used to describe US presidential hopeful Donald Trump's proposal to ban Muslims from entering the United States. His comments coming just a week after a Muslim couple killed 14 people in a shooting spree in California. In the US and across the Atlantic in Europe, the interlinked issues of race, identity and immigration have always been deeply controversial. Some countries have sought to lock down their borders, but none have gone quite so far as to call for all Muslims to be banned from entering a country. Here's some of what Donald Trump had to say.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. We have no choice. We have no choice. We can be politically correct and we can be stupid, but it's going to get worse and worse. Until we are able to determine and understand this problem and the dangerous threat it poses, our country cannot be the victim of horrendous attacks by people that believe only in jihad.
Like we've been saying, it's not just the US. It's been 50 years since the UK passed the Race Relations Act, the first law to address racial discrimination in Britain. Today, it doesn't seem like a radical bit of legislation, but it was a breakthrough for the time.
Something new and ugly raises its head in Britain. In Notting Hill Gate, only a mile or two from London's West End, racial violence. An angry crowd of youths chases a Negro into a greengrocer shop.
Britain's new immigrants, many of them from former colonies, faced open hostility and prejudice in the 1950s and 60s. And all these years later, the Britain they helped change is described either as a model of multiculturalism or a model of racial failure, depending on your political views. Let's bring in our guests who all join us from London today. Lee Jasper, co-chair of the Barack National Executive Movement Against Xenophobia. Omar Khan, director of Runnymede, an independent race equality think tank in the UK. And Charlie Wolf, political commentator and former communications director for Republicans Abroad UK. Welcome to all of you, gentlemen. Good to have you with us. Charlie Wolf, what is your response to Donald Trump's words that all Muslims should be banned from the US?
Well, I think it's a little bit over the top, to tell you the truth. But I think what's important is we look at it not necessarily from our own viewpoints, which may obviously disagree with it, but from the viewpoints of the people in the street. He is obviously filling some sort of a vacuum. People are genuinely scared. I don't think the cheering is because they hate Muslims. I think we've been a pretty friendly country to Muslims and to people of all faiths and ethnicities, etc. But right now we've just had the attack in Paris. We had Charlie Hebdo before that in the Jewish supermarket at the same time. We've had San Bernardino. And on Sunday night, the president gives us a lecture on gun ownership, which really has nothing to do with the argument at hand. So people are scared. They're worried. You have a group in Daesh that's calling for a worldwide caliphate and killing Americans and what have you, and celebrating in the streets when we die, and killing people in the most horrendous of ways, burning them alive and beheading them, etc. And they don't feel there's leadership from the president. And Trump, whether bombastically or however you wish to term it, is at least filling that vacuum.
But is it right to tarnish all Muslims with the same brush, which is what he's doing?
No, it's not. But I think what he is saying is until we know who is who, and again, I'm just trying to, I'm not endorsing this. I'm just trying to understand it. there's a worry about who's getting in through our front door. And until we have a better way of knowing who's who, and we've heard reports of Daesh planting people in with Syrian refugees. We understand that the wife of this man was radicalized and in Saudi Arabia. So again, no one's come up with a better plan. I'm saying this is a great plan. I don't know how you're going to ban all Muslims from coming in, but no one seems to have come up with a better plan, and this is why he's getting the attraction he is.
Omar Khan, you were shaking your head there. What do you make of both Charlie's comments and Donald Trump's?
Well, I'm here despite my American accent and despite me being one of the people who will be denied entry by a policy that Charlie seems unwilling to really actually articulate any sort of disgust for. I'm here to speak about the 1965 Race Relations Act in Britain because I'm the leader of a race equality think tank here. But obviously, the implication of what Charlie says is that I should be allowed to be denied because he's not sure whether I'm a terrorist or not. But moving on from that point, I think if you look at the 1965...
Well, hold on. Don't pin it on me. Don't pin it on me.
Well,
I'm just trying to explain
I didn't hear
how Americans would look at it.
Well, I think that there are, to say that there's no other policies on board, that the only thing that's been tried or thought through, I don't think you're reading even your own other candidates' policies on some of these issues. There are Republican candidates. And again, I'm not an expert on the U.S.
Nothing that seems to be obviously, getting...
Go on,
there's nothing that really seems to be reaching the people.
I think if you take that as your standard, you'd have to say that in 1968, when Enoch Powell made his Rivers of Blood speech, and hundreds of thousands of people signed it, that because hundreds of thousands or millions of people agree with the statement, that therefore we're not going to condemn it. I think that is a slippery slope on the way to fascism, frankly, and it's not the sort of message that I would like to hear from a mainstream Republican, nor from a mainstream right-wing person in the UK. And I'm quite happy, actually, in fact, to hear that David Cameron hasn't taken that sort of line here in the UK and has instead, affirmed "you ain't no Muslim, bruv" type of argument here. But in 1968, of course, Enoch Powell said that the extension of equal rights to black people would give the black man the whip hand over the white man, and that he was just articulating what his constituents were telling him, and that white people should be free to discriminate because it was in their liberties, and democracy required us to listen to the democratic and free views of people who felt that there were too many black people, that they were going to take advantage of being allowed equal rights. And I think it's a fair question to ask. What is it saying when we hear from mainstream Republicans, and when we hear, again, I think in not just, let's turn away from the US, but if we look at Europe, which I'm more confident in speaking about.
Okay, Omar, sorry, we are going to talk about Europe in a moment, but I just want to stay with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Lee Jasper, I'm just wondering what you make of his comments and the discussion underway so far.
Well, it's an absolutely outrageous comment, and really Charlie should have no hesitation in condemning Donald Trump's religious bigotry, ignorance, and just lack of plain common sense. You know, America is a nation that has been built on the historical reception of migrants fleeing terror and tyranny all over the world. And the biggest victims of religious extremism is Muslims themselves. To then have a policy that says you will deny the victims of Daesh the respite of looking to America to escape tyranny and oppression is a fundamental abrogation of the constitutional rights position of the United States and an affront to American society, both political and civil. It's got to be remembered that it wasn't long ago that the world was looking to America to say that it had its policy in relation to anti-terrorism security measures right in relation to how it sought to be inclusive of Muslim communities in America. This is a hugely damaging blow to the reputation of the mainstream Republican party and to Donald Trump himself.
And Lee, it's not just in the US, obviously. I mean, across Europe, politics has taken a swing to the right. France's Marine Le Pen and her far-right National Front Party have just won a major victory in regional elections. She's not alone. In Denmark, Sweden, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Austria and Poland, far-right nationalist parties are increasing their popularity and trying to convince voters they've been given a voice, ignored by mainstream politicians. Omar Khan, why are we seeing this dramatic swing to the right?
I think it's a fair question. I think we haven't seen enough, defense of diversity in Europe. I think politicians have sort of accepted immigration for economic reasons, but whether on the left or on the right, the mainstream political leaders haven't said that, Europe as a continent needs to move forward. We are now a continent of immigration, and that's a good thing. And this is a resource for us going forward in terms of the labor market, in terms of us being able to sell our goods and wares globally, in terms of being competitive, in fact, with the United States, with India, with China. It's great for our citizens to speak many languages. And I think in the absence of that, I think it's a lot of people who have been left behind by the economic situation, are filling in a hole and are only hearing, I would say, economic arguments about immigration, and a lot of people don't see that they have benefited directly. And so the lack of leadership, I think, from politicians. I think also a failure to recognize that it's not actually true that all immigrants are doing very well in Europe. If you look across Europe, whether we're talking about Paris or Madrid or Rome or London, of course, black and minority ethnic people are filling the lowest of kinds of jobs. They struggle to get, they have to send in twice as many CVs. For example, in Britain, we've done a research study on this that shows if you have an African or Asian sounding surname, you have to get twice as many CVs just to get an interview. Unemployment rates are higher for black young men. If you look at earnings, they're lower for most black and minority ethnic groups. So I think there's a lack of understanding of the level of racial inequality in our society, but also a failure to positively affirm the benefits that diversity can realize for our societies.
It's difficult to affirm that, isn't it? And let me bring, Lee Jaspin here. In Poland, the Law and Justice Party figure, the former leader, was warning that Muslim refugees would bring parasites and diseases to the local population. In Hungary, Orban said that they would only receive Christians and not Muslims. I mean, what does that serve when so many parts of the world are clearly frightened at the moment? That doesn't help, does it?
It doesn't. Language we've not heard since it was applied to Jewish people in the Second World War in parts of Europe. I think Omar's description and the analysis is a little too kind to politicians. I think that the economic austerity, global financial crisis has led to politicians actively scapegoating minorities, actually trying to mislead vast sections of societies and nations around the world about the cause of their current economic misery, which was caused by the reckless, wanton behaviour of our casino banking industries that bankrupted many nations around the world, and frankly for which politicians are all too keen to point the finger at migrants, black and ethnic minorities, Muslims, Roma people. You can pick your popular minority depending on the nation and the culture you're talking about. But the phenomena of scapegoating, the massive rise in the almost hysterical McCarthyite terms of Islamophobia, where we see now a Muslim passenger thrown off a bus because the passengers felt uncomfortable that he had too many bags, where we see Muslim women in hijabs being routinely and regularly harassed on our streets. What politicians are engaged in is scapegoating of minorities, and of course the history of Europe teaches us.
And do you think it's also scapegoating or excusing or obscuring their policies, Charlie Wolf? If you look at many of the US policies, particularly when it comes to Iraq and their meddling in the Middle East, that has been linked to growing attacks against Americans and other parts of the world.
Well, a couple of things first. Actually, I just want to answer something from before. As someone whose mother came through Ellis Island in 1926, and I grew up in the black section of Boston. I didn't grow up, but my father worked down there, and that's where I spent a lot of time. I'm not going to condemn or endorse Donald Trump in his statements, because I want to try and stay above it if we're going to analyze it and properly look at it.
You should condemn him, Charlie. You should condemn him. Because his comments deserve to be condemned by right-thinking people.
I don't want to make it about... But wait. But wait a minute, hear me out. I'm trying to figure a way to solve it, and I want to stay above it at the moment. That's a decision.
Well, you don't do it by conceding to racism.
Let my feelings one way or the other. I'm not conceding to racism.
But you don't do that by conceding to religious bigotry or racism.
Okay, Lee, let Charlie make his point.
If you want to solve the problem, yeah, all men are created equal, and they hold inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness by their Creator. That's something I believe in, and that goes to all people. But what I'm trying to do is figure why he is connecting, and again, the reason at present is that he is seeming to take charge, and no one else is doing that. So you can sit there and call Donald Trump unhinged, as Jeb Bush has done, or you can say, what are we not doing? President Obama does not seem to be showing leadership at present, and that's what needs to be investigated. And it's, listen, racism and this sort of action has happened time and time again. A great book I would recommend is Thomas Sowell's Black Rednecks and White Liberals, looking at race relations and middlemen minorities. As a Jew, I know my people have suffered it. Lee, I know your people have suffered it. Muslims are suffering it. So let's see why this is happening and how we solve it instead of talking about bankers and politicians.
And Omar, when it comes to racism, there's been a real shift from just color to religion.
I mean, to an extent, it is true. So, for example, we know research studies in France that show if you have a Muslim surname, you have an ethnic penalty in the labor market, but those who have given their children particularly Muslim first names have almost a double penalty. So if you're called Muhammad Salim, you're worse off in the labor market than if you were called, say, Charlie Salim. And that evidence has been shown by economists. So obviously there is a sort of additional or distinct ethnic penalty for being Muslim in many European countries today. And furthermore, in Britain, we've done a research study that showed that if you wear a hijab, you're more likely to be discriminated against as a Muslim woman, whereas if you don't compared to if you don't wear a hijab. I think the only thing I would add about this, of course, is that all forms of racism have always had a cultural element, whether it's anti-Semitic, whether it's anti-black racism. There have been cultural pathologies placed on communities, and those pathologies are then sort of used to excuse discrimination against those groups, and those pathologies have been themselves
But there's
forms
a
of
religious
racism,
angle
typically.
now, isn't there? I mean, so many people
Sure.
link what's going on with ISIL, they link it to religion, but it's found that many of those who do support ISIL have no religious background, Lee.
Yeah, I think that, racism changes, and over the 50 years in Britain, we've seen racism change its form. It's informed by those cultural pathologies. Omar is absolutely right. However, the constituency in which it now affects right across Europe and the UK is growing, and support for what we would call, racism and discriminatory policies, be that in immigration or foreign policy or elsewhere, are growing because the populace is being misled by a political elite whose vested interest is to seek to unfairly demonize all Muslims, rather than tackling the specific problem of the extremist, religious extremism of the very, very few. And in America, one has to say that when it comes to domestic terrorism, white-wearing Christian domestic terrorism in terms of mass slaughter, be that in high schools, be that in theatres and so on, is a problem of huge proportions, and one of which Donald Trump and the Republicans seem remainingly silent upon.
Lee, the problem is remember, perception. Wait, hold on. Perception is reality, and right now you've had these horrible attacks in Paris. You've had this attack in San Bernardino. Again, you have a group calling for worldwide jihad and then a worldwide caliphate, which is a danger to Muslims just as much as it is to Jews and Christians, etc. And that's the perception that's taking the main headlines, and no one is finding a way to say how we're going to fight this. You've got President Obama.
They are finding
who won't
the way.
say the words extreme jihad.
Charlie, if I may, I'm going to use your words perception is reality.
It doesn't appear to the people, though.
Just listen to this. I want to use your words perception is reality, and I want to show you a video by two men from the Netherlands that went viral this week. They disguised a Bible as a Quran and read some verses to people on the street. Let's listen to their reactions.
Voor dit experiment hebben we een Bijbel gekocht en deze omgetoverd tot een Koran. Hierin hebben we schokkende passages gehighlight die sterk in contrast staan met onze westerse normen en waarden. Eens kijken wat er gebeurt als we de citaten uit de Bijbel voorleggen aan de mensen op straat, maar ze in de veronderstelling laten dat ze uit de Koran komen.
Als u mijn verordeningen verwerpt en als uw ziel van mijn bepalingen walgt, u zult dan het vlees van uw eigen zonen eten en het vlees van uw eigen dochters zult u eten. Want ik sta niet toe dat een vrouw onderwijs geeft. Dan moet u haar hand afhakken. Laat uw oog haar niet ontzien. Wanneer een man met een andere man slaapt, zij moeten zeker tot de dood gebracht worden.
Wat is jullie eerste reactie? Klinkt echt belachelijk.
Nou, ik wist eigenlijk helemaal niet dat dit ook erin stond.
Hoe kan je hierin geloven? Ongelooflijk vind ik dat eigenlijk.
Handen afhakken en zo, ja, zo zijn zij blijkbaar, maar ik...
Als je vanaf je geboorte al zo wordt opgevoed met zulke gedachten, dan ga je toch op een bepaalde manier denken.
Dit komt over alsof ze weer willen onderdrukken en willen onderwerpen aan hun geloof.
Als je dit nou naast de Bijbel zou zetten, wat zijn dan voor jou de grootste verschillen?
Ik vind de Koran, zeg maar, als ik dit zo hoor, die vind ik iets agressiever met de hak de hand eraf.
Ik denk dat de Bijbel toch ook positieve dingen heeft.
Ze vertellen het anders in ieder geval.
Het grote verschil is toch wel wat hier ook expliciet blijkt uit veel meer de rol van de vrouw.
In de Bijbel staat er iets minder hard erop, gewoon iets vredeachtiger.
Nou, dan hebben we een kleine verrassing voor jou. Want deze prachtige zinnen uit de Koran, die kwamen gewoon rustig uit de Bijbel.
Serieus?
Ja, wat de hel.
Zo, dat had ik niet gedacht. Nee? Dat had ik echt niet gedacht, nee.
Veel mooi voor woorden. Dit is echt ziek. Dit is echt ziek.
Meen je dat?
Ja, het hebben we heel goed gedaan. Niet verwacht.
Ja, nee?
Het zijn alleen maar vooroordelen. En ik zeg altijd van, je moet niet vooroordelen, maar zelf doe ik het ook alleen maar. En het is iets wat je niet bewust doet.
Het heeft alles met de media te maken natuurlijk.
Ik blijf er gewoon bij, blijf gewoon rationeel nadenken. Ja. Kijk gewoon wat een beetje logisch is en doe er je voordeel mee.
Interesting responses there, Omar.
Yes, well, I think very few people are purely literalist about their religious beliefs, and most people probably don't know, especially today in modern secular Europe, what is in the Bible. And I think one of the things that shows is that when we look at religious belief and practice, it's as much about the cultural traditions and the way in which religion is practiced today. And I think the reality perception point that Charlie's trying to push, I think for most of the perception that he's talking about amongst the people who are supposedly are cheering Donald Trump is quite frankly the wrong perception about the reality of American and indeed global Muslims. And I think if you were to turn it on its head, the perception of most Muslims right now, maybe Charlie and others who aren't condemning Trump should reflect on how do black people feel, how do Muslims feel, what is our perception of hearing these sorts of statements? What
Lee,
does that mean for
sorry,
our
Lee,
reality?
you're
in
nodding
terms
your
of
head there, and I just want to.
Listen,
sorry. I just want to go to Lee quickly. A reality that many people do face, which Charlie did touch on, is that they are frightened. They are frightened of the influx. They are. You could tell from that video that people don't understand. There's a miscommunication. So, what can be done now to stop what's happening?
Well, I think firstly is that we have to have politicians who have enough about them to act like statesmen instead of venal politicians who are simply there to win elections, in which they play cut and run with racism and religious bigotry in order to secure electoral votes, to secure their positions. We need people who take the long view, who understand the importance of a multiracial, participatory, inclusive democracy is absolutely vital, not just in moral terms, although that's important, but in economic terms and in terms of wider progress throughout the world for very many countries. So I think what we're looking for is politicians of vision, politicians of commitment, politicians who are going to lay bare the analysis.
Lee, I'm going to interrupt you there because I do want to give the last word to Charlie. Your final thoughts there, Charlie.
Well, I think a lot of it is education and exposure. I mean, my son has 2 Somali girls as best friends. I work every day with people with hijabs. I don't think twice about it. In the 1970s, when white flight was going on, I was down on Washington Street in Roxbury, where my father, had served the black community for 50 years. So it wasn't strange to me. So I think we need to educate and bring these people together, and that, to me, is going to move it forward. But, again, you have to understand the fears of these acts of terrorism, and people need to feel safe, and that's why they're acting like they do. I don't endorse any kind of racism. I never have, and my record, I think, speaks for it. But, we can sit here and we can call Donald Trump unhinged or use all these words, or we can battle him in a better way by saying, here's the solution to the problem. No
Okay,
one's
and
offered
let's
that
leave
yet.
it there. Charlie Wolf, Omar Khan, Lee Jasper, great conversation. Thank you very much. And thank you for watching. As always, you can leave your comments on the program's page or our website, aljazeera.com, and you can post your views on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can tweet us at AJ Inside Story or at Jane Dutton. For me and the rest of the team, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.